Ikuto was an ugly bum who ran away from his abusive father, but got shipwrecked in a massive storm. However, upon waking up on an island full of women, he now has to survive hordes of freaky baddies who want his seed. It all starts after Ikuto washes up on an island, where a hot girl named Suzu finds him lying unconscious while fishing. She immediately slaps him a couple of times to revive him, and when that doesn't work, she tries giving him mouth-to-mouth, but only ends up blowing air into him like a balloon. Afterward, she takes Ikuto to her granny to help revive him, and while the granny nurses him back to health, Suzu notices that Ikuto's chest is flatter than a chopping board, unlike hers, which is bouncy. That's when the granny reveals that Ikuto is a boy, causing all the girls on the island to flood the room because he is the first male they've seen in their lives. But the senile old hag immediately yells at them to get a life. After Ikuto finally recovers, he has lunch with Suzu and her granny, where he thanks them for saving his life and then asks how he can leave the island. The granny tells him that it's impossible, explaining that their ancestors stumbled here by accident after getting shipwrecked by a heavy storm a long time ago, and they've been stuck here for ages, which surprises Ikuto. After lunch, Ikuto moves in with Suzu, and when he asks about her folks, Suzu explains that she lives alone, which makes Ikuto tense, as he realizes that for the first time in his virgin life, he would be living alone with a girl. Suzu then suggests that Ikuto take a bath, and while he does, his gutter mind is already thinking about cracking her buns. However, his naughty thoughts are cut short when Suzu joins him in the bath with exposed milkies, giving him an instant nosebleed. She insists on washing his back, and while she scrubs away, Ikuto twitches like a faulty clanker. Just then, Suzu's arch-nemesis, Ayana, suddenly shows up in the bath with zero plot cover, and both girls immediately start fighting over Ikuto, making him faint while busting a fat one. Sometime later, Ikuto is checking out the island when he suddenly notices that all the island babes are eyeing him like the last slice of pizza, which freaks him out. As he tries to escape, the thirsty chicks chase after him like a giveaway package, and when Ikuto demands to know why he is being chased like a thief, the old vegetable shows up to reveal that it's simply because he is the only guy on the whole island. However, unlike you degenerates, Ikuto doesn't want a freaky harem, so he takes a canoe and starts paddling his way out of the island. But just then, a massive whirlpool appears, washing him back ashore, and that's when the old fart reminds him that leaving the island is mission impossible. Hearing the word impossible triggers memories of Ikuto's past, when his father had called him a useless waste of space, and this ignites a resolve to leave the island by any means. But every time he tries, his canoe gets attacked by the whirlpool, and he is sent back to the shore. Eventually, he notices a small gap between the whirlpools from which he can escape, but as he follows the path, he gets attacked by a massive dolphin and almost drowns. Luckily, Suzu dives into the water and pulls him out, before explaining that the dolphin actually saved him from a giant whirlpool that would have ended his life if he had followed his path. This makes Ikuto finally realize that it would be impossible for him to really leave the island. Later that night, Suzu shares with Ikuto the strange reason why there are no guys on the island. It turns out that many years ago, all the beta chumps decided to hold a fishing tournament to show how manly they were. But during this tournament, they were all caught in a massive tsunami that appeared once every century, which swallowed them all. When Ikuto asks if such a big wave can ever come again in hopes that he can eventually leave the island, Suzu reminds him that tsunamis only occur every 100 years, making Ikuto realize that by the time the next one appears, he would probably be the same age as Joe Biden. Not long after, while trying to get some much-needed shut-eye, Ikuto wonders what would happen to his life now on this deserted island, but then he tries to encourage himself with the fact that the island is much better than being back home with his inconsiderate pops. While lost in thought, Ikuto gets attacked by the mischievous Ayana, and this time she bundles him like a sack, ready to kidnap him, but Suzu storms inside the room just in time to stop her. This leads to both girls fighting like bitter rivals, and eventually Suzu smacks Ayana with the sack, sending her flying out of the house. While Suzu checks on Ikuto to ensure he is fine, the rest of the girls on the island suddenly burst inside the room and start walking toward them like mindless zombies. As Suzu wonders what the heck is happening, the Grams pops out like an unwanted YouTube ad to explain that after 12 years of not having their rusty engines oiled, Ikuto's presence on the island has suddenly awakened the girls' freaky urges to get clapped hard. As a solution to this freaky problem, Granny advises the Magnum-deprived girls to try to control their urges that night, and then promises that the following day they will all undergo a hide-and-seek competition, and the winner will get Ikuto's capped hammer as her trophy. The next morning, Ikuto desperately tries to stop the competition from happening, but the granny informs him that if the competition doesn't hold, then he should get ready to get sucked dry by all the thirsty girls. Fearing for his life, Ikuto agrees to the competition, and the granny announces that the first girl to touch Ikuto will be declared the winner. With that, the competition starts, and Ikuto, confident in his Usain Bolt abilities, believes he cannot be caught by a mere girl, but to his shock, the girls close the distance. However, Suzu, desperate to save him, launches her piggy pet, Tona, at the girls, smacking one on the head and causing the rest to stumble. After Ikuto manages to escape, Rin spots him high up a tree and chases after him, determined to be his bride, but Suzu drops her before Ikuto even realizes that he is being chased. Shortly afterwards, Ikuto runs into a nerdy girl named Chikaga, who claims she isn't interested in marrying a small pickle loser like him, but just wants to help him. However, Ikuto later discovers that she's nothing but a creep who needs his sausage for an experiment, so he bolts faster than his feet can carry him. While searching for the perfect hiding spot, Ikuto accidentally enters a forest filled with monster plants that want to bite his head off. But as he fights for his life, he notices that they all suddenly vanish like Saitama's hairline, giving him cause to worry. Just then, a giant, monstrous panda emerges from deep in the bush and attacks Ikuto, but he gets saved again by Suzu, who drops the monster without breaking a sweat. As she stretches her hand to help him up, Ikuto figures it must be some trick to touch him and then win the competition, so the dummy pushes her aside to escape, but gets smacked hard by the panda. Ikuto lands on a tree branch, and as he tries to recover, he gets surrounded by the girls, who all desperately try to climb up, but suddenly they get hit by a poisonous gas that puts them to sleep, fired by Ayana, who also shoots Ikuto with a sleeping dart. At that moment, Suzu also arrives, but she gets hit with the same sleeping dart, which knocks her out cold. Ikuto finally regains consciousness a while later, and as he tries to escape, Ayane turns her attention to him, but Ikuto creates a distraction with the sack that sends her flying. When the sun eventually sets, Ikuto is relieved that none of the crazy hoes managed to touch him, but his excitement goes 6 feet under when the granny calls everyone and announces that he lost. Ikuto tries to protest the decision, but the granny, who has been watching him the whole time, declares that the winner is Suzu and then tells Ikuto the exact moment he touched her, which was when he pushed her melons to the side to escape. However, to everyone's shock, Suzu refuses to be Ikuto's main chick, explaining that marriage should be between lovers and should not be forced. She further adds that Ikuto should be given the opportunity to choose whom among the girls to marry, and that she is ready to wait for his decision. The next morning, after breakfast, Suzu mentions fetching water for the house, so Ikuto, trying to flex his Giga Chad status, offers to help, and she agrees. After fetching the water, Ikuto almost dies while carrying the bucket of water, while Suzu carries it effortlessly. On their way back home, they run into Big Girl Rin, who is carrying a massive drum of water like it's nothing, and Ikuto is shocked, realizing that the girls on the island are built differently. Suzu, noticing the shock on his face, explains that Rin is the strongest person on the island, but this only makes Ikuto mad and desperate to display Big D energy. So he runs off with the heavy bucket, heading for Suzu's crib, but he trips and crashes to the ground, spilling the water everywhere. Shortly afterwards, Suzu washes the dirty clothes in the stream, and Ikuto, still all hyped to show he is a manly man, offers to help her out with the washing, but only ends up tripping and making a big fool of himself. After that, Ikuto tries chopping the firewood, but almost unalives himself in the process. However, even after being a complete mess in every task, Suzu is patient with him and even offers him water. After completing the housework, Suzu takes Ikuto to her day job in the field, where two basic-looking chicks ask them to help dig up some sweet potatoes. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity to show off his finger skills to the girls, Ikuto volunteers to uproot the potatoes, but as he tries, he almost drops a hot watery poop and finally gives up. Feeling miserable, Ikuto cries over losing all his aura points in front of the girls, and to console him, Suzu then suggests they uproot the potato together, and Ikuto shyly agrees. After much struggle, they manage to pull out the biggest potato in the history of mankind. Ikuto is shocked by the size of the potato, but when he looks around, he notices how big the rest of the produce is, which makes him realize the island is totally different from Japan. After transporting the potato to the barn, Ikuto and Suzu go fishing, but when Ikuto tries to pull his catch out of the river, he pulls out a massive dragonfish that bites him straight in the cheeks. A few hours later, Suzu and Ikuto push the cart carrying the massive fish back home, But just as Ikuto thinks they are done with work that day, he is disappointed when they run into Chikaga and a jailbait named Yukino, who reminds Suzu about the mushroom she is supposed to harvest. Upon arriving at the mushroom site, Ikuto is shocked to see a mushroom shaped like his rod but longer and thicker. When he notices the girls harvesting the thick mushrooms like experts, Ikuto decides to show them that he is the guy here. So, despite jailbait warning him not to, Ikuto forcefully pulls the mushroom, but it leaves him chewed up like beef and spewed out like rubbish. Suzu then explains that the mushrooms are of two types, the real ones and the temu ones, like the one that attacked him, so Ikuto has to be very careful not to pull out the fake ones. Determined not to give up, Ikuto tries to pull out the right mushroom, but he keeps pulling out the wrong one and getting himself chewed up on a consistent basis. At this point, Chikaga believes Ikuto will never be able to tell the right mushroom from the wrong one, so to prove her wrong, Ikuto activates his Nen ability, but even then, the idiot still gets it wrong and gets chewed up. However, when Yukino mocks that it is impossible for Ikuto to harvest a mushroom, the word impossible reminds Ikuto of his father's mockery, and he hulks out. He goes on a wild harvesting spree to pick the right mushroom, but at the end of the day, Ikuto gets chewed up and spewed out by every mushroom he attempts to yeet. This makes him feel like a half-assed loser, but Suzu consoles him by thanking him for defeating all the fake mushrooms in the forest. Still, Ikuto cannot be consoled, as he feels he is just some useless freeloader, and for the rest of the day, he stays alone thinking about his miserable life. Sometime later, Rin meets him in this state and tries to take advantage of his depression to get her skittle-diddled, but Yukino, Suzu, and Chikage arrive just in time to play the ultimate cockblockers. From the bag of worms they harvested, Yukino attacks Rin with worms for being too thirsty. But Ikuto sees this as his perfect chance to finally shine, so he tackles all the worms away to save Rin, which rizzes her up and increases her wetness for him. Later that evening, Ikuto apologizes to Suzu for being totally useless during all the tasks and for not being able to repay her for saving him. But Suzu tells him his presence in her life has already repaid the favor. She explains that before he came to the island, she was a loner because her parents had left for the Super Bowl and never returned, and after work she would watch others go home together, which always made her sad. However, with his presence in her life now, she declares that she isn't unhappy anymore because it feels like she finally has a family. Days later, Ikuto and Suzu head to Ayana's condo to deliver some fresh radish. However, upon arriving, they meet Machi, Ayana's unhinged sister, who tells Suzu about the special daifuku her mom is preparing and then promises to give her 20 of the snacks if she can help her capture Ayana. Suzu, being a sucker for the daifuku snack, immediately agrees to catch Ayane for her. So she quickly enters the forest to set some traps, and after she is done, she loudly announces that Ayana's chest is flatter than a surfboard. Knowing that roasting Ayana's zero plots is the only way to draw the menace out of hiding. Just as expected, Ayane immediately rushes out from her hiding spot and is ready to start throwing fists with Suzu for roasting her. But Suzu, excited that her plan worked, tells her to simply get in the sack so she can take her to Machi. However, with the help of her giant cockatrice, Ayane is able to escape, but somehow she pulls Ikuto along in the process. On the way, Ayane reveals to Ikuto that she is scared of her sister, Machi, who finds joy in pranking and teasing her. However, before Ikuto can say a word, Suzu suddenly pops out of the bush, determined to catch Ayane at all costs. But Ayane flips the script by counter-offering to give her 30 daifuku snacks instead of the 20 that her sister promised if she can just help her find Machi's secret, and Suzu, being a hopeless foodie, immediately accepts. However, at the end of the day, instead of finding Machi's weakness, Suzu manages to get both sisters to trash out their beef and still gets her daifuku snacks in return. While heading back home, Ikuto and Suzu follow a narrow path where Suzu accidentally falls, and in the process, she lands her cakes on a 1,000-year-old figurine, destroying it completely. This frightens her because, according to ancient folklore, a powerful priestess had sealed a dangerous spirit that was tormenting the world inside the figurine. Suzu believes destroying the figure would activate some kind of curse, but Ikuto isn't a fan of curses and ghosts, so he tells her to chill and then suggests they just go home. However, later that night, while having dinner, Suzu spots a creepy ghost outside the house, which scares the life out of her. Even the next day, she is so creeped out that she is unable to stay on her own and is always leeching onto Ikuto. Taking advantage of Suzu's fear, Ayane decides to pull one of her mischievous pranks on her, so later that night, she brings a creepy mask to scare Suzu even more at her house. However, while peeping into the house, Ayane comes face to face with the creepy ghost, which almost paralyzes her in fear. Upon hearing Ayane scream outside, Ikuto immediately rushes to check, but at that moment, the ghost enters the house to attack Suzu. Not one to be frightened by a ghost shaped like Yo Mama, Ikuto knuckles up and gives the ghost the beating of his life, forcing the ghost to leave, never to return again. The following week, while out fishing with Suzu, Ikuto is lost in thought, reflecting on his home and how worried his family must be about him. He wonders if he is going to waste the rest of his youthful existence on this crazy island, but suddenly Yukino comes crashing down on him out of nowhere, causing both of them to faint. After they regain consciousness, Yukino, in the company of some wild animals, explains that she is searching for her bear pet, Kuma, and then asks Ikuto to help her find Kuma. Ikuto is reluctant to help the midget since she has no milkshakes to suffocate his face in, but the second Suzu perks up with interest, he caves immediately and agrees. Excited, Yukino proposes they split into groups to cover more ground and then hops onto Ikuto's shoulders, saying she and Ikuto will form one group while Suzu and the wild animals will form the second group. Before Suzu can agree, she gets scooped up by the animals and carried off, leaving Ikuto and Yukino to commence their search as a team. As they head deeper inside the forest, they spot a giant footprint and immediately assume it must belong to Yukino's bear, Kuma, whom they are searching for. On trailing the footprint, they run into a bear, and Ikuto is ready to wrap this mission up, but Yukino tells him the bear isn't Kuma. She explains that Kuma is almost the same age as her and not an old geezer like the bear in front of them. However, being called an old geezer pisses off the bear, so it responds by smacking Ikuto across the forest. As they push deeper into the forest, Ikuto and Yukino keep running into bears every few minutes, and every single time Ikuto gets his hopes up, the plotless dwarf announces that none of these fugly-looking bears is her Kuma, frustrating Ikuto to the max. Yukino explains that Kuma is a weird type of bear who cannot be identified by looks alone, but has a tattoo of a crescent moon on her chest. She then suggests that they take a break, and while having lunch under a tree, Yukino tells Ikuto that she wouldn't mind letting him hit just once, but Ikuto firmly refuses to be in some rich dude's files. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Suzu and her team of wild animals encounter Ayane, who, as usual, always wants to pick a fight with Suzu. But the animals aren't ready to deal with the cakeless and melonless nutcase, so they send her crashing into a tree and then continue on their way. Around the same time, the search for Kuma leads Ikuto and Yukino to a rickety bridge stretched over a valley, and since Ikuto is afraid of heights, he freezes at the entrance. But Yukino starts running onto the bridge without any care for her life like a brainless wimp. Suddenly, the bridge collapses and Ikuto is forced to play the hero he didn't plan for, and both of them almost revokes their living license if not for Kuma, who suddenly shows up from her hiding to save them. Yukino lights up in excitement seeing her bear friend again, and they are soon joined by Suzu and her team of animals. Before long, Ikuto is out in the yard practicing his fencing technique so he can level up and be able to protect Suzu and the other girls like a real alpha should. When Suzu shows up, asking what he is up to, Ikuto explains that he is working out, since a real man should protect his woman. However, Suzu has no idea what the heck the guy is yapping about because all her life, no man had ever protected her. And Ikuto clocks that this is probably because the island has been running on a zero male population for generations. A few hours later, while the two of them are going about their tasks for the day, a massive earthquake suddenly rips through the island. And the tremor not only bursts the pipe at the water source, but also frightens the heck out of Suzu, so she runs back home while scooping Ikuto into the air like a flag. The next morning, Suzu is ready to bathe in the hot spring, but she is shocked to find that it has completely dried up. It turns out all the hot springs on the island have suddenly dried up overnight, so Rin, Yukino, her bear Kuma, and the two crazy sisters, Ayane and Machi, mobilize to fetch water and manually build a hot spring from scratch using fire. Meanwhile, Ikuto and Suzu chop the firewood, and once the hot spring is all set, they cheer and immediately dive right in to enjoy the warmth of the water. After the bath, they all discuss the sudden dryness of the island springs, and while the girls lament the terrible situation, Ikuto laughs and tells them they don't need to bathe every day. He suggests they simply use a wet towel to clean their bodies like animals, but he quickly realizes how out of pocket his idea is when the girls collectively give him an angry stare that freaks him out. They call him a disgusting pig for even thinking of such a silly idea, and Ikuto realizes that, for a girl, what he just said was similar to rage baiting. Later that night while in bed, Ikuto thinks about how important bathing is to these island babes, especially to Suzu, and this makes him realize that fixing the island's water problem is the perfect opportunity to demonstrate just how manly and useful he can be. So, very early the next morning, he heads out alone to the main water source that supplies the entire island, but soon realizes that he has to climb to the top, which gives him cold feet since he has a fear of heights. However, he eventually makes it to the top with the help of Yukino and one of her flying wild beasts. Not long after, Suzu and Rin arrive at the water source with the same intention of investigating the problem, but then find Ikuto there already, so they decide to work together. Ikuto volunteers to be lowered down into the well to check the situation from the inside while the girls manage the rope from above. However, as he descends into the well, he is shocked to see the fattest bunda above him that his virgin eyes weren't prepared for, causing him to slip and crash at the bottom. After Suzu makes it down to the stuck level, she and Ikuto get to work clearing the packed sand together, until suddenly another massive earthquake occurs while they are inside the well. This causes the ground to shatter beneath them and dumps both of them straight to the very bottom. Realizing this is the very moment that he needs to man up, Ikuto piggybacks Suzu when he notices she has injured her leg. Soon, they finally reach an opening above, but before they start climbing, Ikuto spots the very rock blocking the water flow, so he drops Suzu and starts striking it, hoping the pressure will blast it out of the way. Eventually, he succeeds, and as the water erupts like a volcano, Suzu nearly gets swept away by the pressure, but Ikuto finally gets his chance to prove he is a Sigma by saving her, and together they are blasted out of the well by the water. Even though Suzu still doesn't understand why it is a man's duty to protect a woman, she is happy to experience being a useless baggage for the first time in her life. Weeks later, Suzu takes Ikuto deeper inside the forest to officially introduce him to her master, who taught her martial arts. Ikuto is desperate to know what kind of personality her master has, and Suzu explains that her master is the lord of the forest, which makes Ikuto immediately imagine that her master must be some kind of terrifying monster. However, when they finally meet her master, Ikuto is stunned to see that the so-called master is just some proud tiny kitty. When he asks Suzu if the little guy is her master, he gets flicked hard on the cheek by the cat, making him understand size doesn't matter. Suzu also confirms what Ikuto's cheek already knows, that the cat is her master and has lived for more than 100 years as the king of cats. With every doubt out of the way, Suzu's master explains that the reason he called for them is because of the survival game. This survival game is an annual fierce battle between the cat and the dog tribes in the forest to determine who will become the new lord of the forest. The cat master then requests that Ikuto and Suzu participate in the game as part of the cat team, since the power of the dog tribe has increased over time. Suzu and Ikuto agree to help, and soon the survival game commences. The rule of the game is that each side must draw a mustache on their opponent, and the game only ends when a mustache has been successfully drawn on either of the masters. After cutting through the dog tribe's forces and drawing mustaches on every dog that got in their way, Suzu and Ikuto finally make it to the mountain where the dog leader is posted up. But as they go up the mountain, they are faced with formidable opponents they never expected, Ayane and Machi. Ayane immediately faces her usual rival, Suzu, while Ikuto is forced to battle against Machi. But Machi makes the outcome of the fight sweeter by assuring Ikuto that if he can defeat her, she will let him clean out her dirty pipes. The two battles kick off simultaneously across the mountainside, and while Ikuto and Suzu are fully occupied with Machi and Ayane, the cat master finally seizes the perfect opportunity to launch a mid-air attack against the dog leader to draw a mustache on his muffy cheeks and claim victory for the cats. A few days after the survival game wraps up, Ikuto and Suzu join the rest of the gang for a trip to see the cherry blossom. However, since the cherry blossom sits on the other side of a forest housing a terrifying monster that nobody wants to disturb, the group decides to split into smaller teams to move quietly and avoid attracting its attention. After drawing lots, Ikuto ends up paired with Machi, who wastes no time making him pay for not hitting her kitty with his destroyer during the survival game by exploiting his fear of heights and dragging him across ledges and elevated paths. After pushing through more hurdles than Hercules, the team finally makes it to the exit of the forest, but Ikuto is pissed because he has no idea why they had to suffer so much just to see a flower. However, when he finally gets to see how magnificent the cherry blossom is, he is awestruck by its beauty and forced to apologize to Suzu for ever questioning their reason for wanting to see it. So for the rest of the day, the gang gathers beneath the cherry blossom to have lunch and gist all through. Sometime later, Suzu and Ikuto get invited to Chikaga's crib, and on getting there, Ikuto stops dead in his tracks because her condo looks like it was lifted straight out of Beverly Hills and dropped into the middle of nowhere. As they knock on the door, a big-headed elephant suddenly rushes to open it and, in the process, slams Ikuto against the wall. Meanwhile, Chikaga, watching the scene unfold, is already cooking up her perfect plan: to observe a guy's big old dong in 4K for the first time in her life. On finally getting inside the house, Suzu and Ikuto are properly served tea by Chikaga's elephant maid, named Panako. But suddenly, Chikage walks in wearing a slutty dress, and upon seeing her, Ikuto instantly suffers a chronic meltdown. When he complains about how seductive the dress is, Chikaga changes to a less goon-worthy dress, which eventually relaxes Ikuto's trouser snake. When Ikuto questions why she initially dressed like a hoe, Chikage explains that according to the book she read about the city, dressing that way was the surefire way to make guys happy. The mention of books piques Ikuto's interest, so Chikage gives them a tour of her underground library, where she keeps all her steamy Playboy magazines and Johnny Sin tapes. She explains that she is a freak who likes to hoard things that wash ashore, and then shows Ikuto her latest acquisition. Ikuto tells her that it's a rice cooker, and after he explains what it does and how it works, Chikage continues to bring more and more trashy gadgets she found on the shore for him to explain. This makes Ikuto start to feel more like a genius, but when the girls excitedly suggest using the rice cooker to make rice, Ikuto crushes their hopes by telling them it is completely useless, since the island has no electricity. After spending hours touring Chikage's personal collection of washed-up junk, Ikuto suggests they head back home for dinner, but Chikage immediately refuses to let them leave just yet, as she remembers that she has yet to get a nice view of Ikuto's dong. To tempt them into staying, she offers to give Suzu what she can never resist, Daifuku snacks. Upon hearing this, Suzu is already drooling like a starving dog and begging Ikuto to stay a bit longer. With no choice, Ikuto agrees, and after staying for a nice dinner, Suzu points out that they really have to leave, considering how late it is. Desperate not to let them go, Chikaga spills black octopus fluid on them, and now they are forced to have a shower. Being a timid virgin, Ikuto allows the girls to have their shower first, and after they are done a few minutes later, he goes in to have his own bath. While he is enjoying the warmth of the water, Panako walks in, offering to help him wash his back, and as this is underway, Chikaga sneaks into the water. Using a telescope, the naughty freak examines every feature of Ikuto's body, including the massive junk the dude is packing down there. Later that night, Ikuto and Suzu finally decide to pass the night at Chikaga's place, but Ikuto notices that Suzu is bothered by something. When he asks what the problem is, Suzu admits that she is jealous that Panako gets to wash his back while he would never allow her to enter the bath with him. Shocked to hear this, Ikuto reminds her that Panako isn't Ellie, but Suzu, consumed by jealousy, tells him that there is no difference between an elephant and a girl since they both have a dark hole. The following day, while wandering through the forest, Ikuto accidentally stumbles upon Rin mid-shower in the stream, which embarrasses her. However, seeing her embarrassed reaction catches Ikuto off guard because most island chicks would rather confidently ask him to bathe with them. But as he glazes her reaction, he gets a peek at her marshmallows, which causes Rin even more embarrassment, so she punches him into the sky. As Ikuto crashes hard to the ground, Rin meets up with him and then apologizes for giving him a mandatory skydive. She explains that she hates it when people catch a glimpse of her vertical smile because it embarrasses her, and then she asks Ikuto what he plans to do the next day. Ikuto replies that he plans to massage his sausage all day, so Rin calls him a filthy dog, and then invites him to her workplace to help her out. Later that night, Ikuto fills Suzu in on his afternoon adventure of getting lost in the forest and running into Rin, but he carefully edits out the part where he stumbled upon her mid-shower. When Suzu notices the giant bump sitting on his forehead and asks about it, Ikuto immediately changes the topic and suggests they have dinner instead. Over dinner, he informs her about visiting Rin's workshop the next day, but Suzu insists on tagging along. Meanwhile, across the island, Rin wraps up dinner with her family and casually mentions that Ikuto will be coming over to help out at the workshop the next day, and everyone is thrilled to hear this. Her sketchy old Gramps advises her to make sure she doesn't miss her chance to get her cherry popped, while her mother, Risa, suggests she lure Ikuto into the bushes and trap him as soon as possible. Rin's sister Mikoko, however, is not thrilled about any of this and is furious at the idea of some guy showing up to take her sister's attention away from her. The next day, as Ikuto and Suzu arrive at the construction site, Risa, desperate to pimp out her daughter, immediately suggests that Rin and Ikuto work together while Suzu goes to have fun with the animal-looking workers. The second Rin and Ikuto head off together, Mikoko meets Suzu, ready to pitch her scheme of sabotaging whatever is developing between Ikuto and Rin. However, when it looks like Suzu isn't interested in joining her little scheme, Mikoko finally lets the cat out of the bag by telling her how Ikuto was staring at Rin's bobs at the river the day before, like a foolish simp in love. Hearing this makes Suzu emotional, and she remembers that the day before, Ikuto had failed to tell her the entire truth. This new revelation now makes her jealous as she watches Ikuto and Rin talk, but she tries to concentrate more on her work. Throughout that day, Rin tries her best to show Ikuto how skillful she is just so she can riz him up, but her nerves get the better of her, and she just ends up being clumsy. Meanwhile, watching Rin and Ikuto work side by side drives Mikoko mad, and when she can't contain her rage, she attacks Ikuto and then claims it was an accident. When Ikuto finally has had enough of the repeated assaults, he snaps at Mikoko, and, in response, Mikoko warns him to stop flirting with her sister and then challenges him to a duel. Ikuto, not one to back down, accepts, and as the duel commences, the two try to outwork each other but end up working like junkies. At the end of the day, just the two of them finish the construction work that would have taken 50 workers, and everyone is impressed. Rin, for her part, feels the quiet sting of having failed to land a single Riz moment all day despite her best efforts. However, when the group sits down for dinner at her place later that evening, and Ikuto hears that she personally cooked the food, he thanks her with genuine warmth, and her stomach immediately fills with butterflies. Before long, the rainy season arrives, and Suzu is forced to stay home instead of going to her usual work in the field. Ikuto then takes advantage of staying at home to make food, but ends up preparing a soup that could cause a pandemic. He immediately apologizes for being useless once again, but Suzu takes a big gulp of the disgusting soup, and, to his surprise, says she likes it. As the rain continues to drizzle, the boredom of not doing anything starts to drive Ikuto crazy, so he rages like a madman and then confesses that back in Japan, he had never been this bored. He admits that he was either binge-watching videos on AniEnders or gooning on OnlyFans. To solve his boredom, Suzu offers to let him jiggle his waist on her cake, but realizing it sounds too desperate, she instead asks if they can play rock, paper, scissors. Ikuto agrees, so she brings out a game box, and as they play, Ikuto comments that this is the first time they have actually played any game at home. Suzu tells him that it's probably because it's actually the first time it has rained since he came to the island. She shares that on the day he arrived on the island, there was a heavy storm that destroyed buildings, but Ikuto notices that while talking about the storm, Suzu suddenly zones out like a bonehead, which surprises him. After Suzu beats Ikuto like the trashy loser he is in the game, he compliments how good she is at it, and Suzu admits that she is no noob because she used to play the game during the rainy season with her mom back then. This makes Ikuto wonder whether Suzu has been zoning out lately because she is missing her mom. He thinks about how lonely it must have been for her to stay all by herself, especially during rainy days like this one. Suddenly, Suzu gets an invitation from the gang, who have come to spend time with her, knowing she might be lonely on rainy days like this. Silently watching them talk casually relieves Ikuto, and he is happy that Suzu has nice besties who often think about her well-being. After spending hours playing with Suzu, everyone leaves, and once again, Suzu and Ikuto are left alone. While sitting outside watching the rain drizzle, Suzu then decides to sing a song her mother used to sing to her when she was little. She reveals that anytime her mother sang the song to her, her mom would always talk about Suzu meeting her prince charming someday and getting married. Hearing this makes Ikuto imagine how beautiful Suzu will be as his bride, and the picture makes him want to wank his willy, but he refuses to let the dog out the cage. Seeing his sus facial expression, Suzu immediately suspects he must be thinking something nasty, and when she questions him about it, Ikuto denies it, claiming he wasn't thinking about anything. Later that night, Suzu has a wet dream where Ikuto is helping her wash her rims, and the fact that she gets to share a bath with Ikuto, something she has always desired, makes her really happy. Ikuto wakes a few minutes later and is surprised to find Suzu's side of the bed empty, only to discover her dripping wet and sleepy inside a water tank, still trapped in her steamy bath dream. The following morning, Suzu catches a cold after sleeping in the water tank all night, and the village granny gets called in to assess the situation. When Ikuto asks what needs to be done, the granny tells him plainly that the solution is ice. They need to get some to lower her temperature. Ikuto immediately suspects the granny must be high on ganja, since there's no electricity or refrigerator on the island, but the granny assures him that there is definitely ice on the island. Later that day, Ikuto goes in search of ice following the granny's directions, and he runs into some thirsty cougar who jumps on him, desperate to taste his golden snowplow. But just then, Yukino shows up and scolds her. She tells her this is exactly why her father left, and Ikuto learns that the MILF is Yukino's mom, who introduces herself as Kagami. When Ikuto tells them about his mission to get some ice for Suzu, Yukino takes him inside a mine, the coolest place on the island where the ice is kept. But she is shocked to see there isn't a single block of ice inside, and Kagami then admits that she was responsible for using all the ice to make popsicles. After venting at her mom for acting like a Gen Z, Yukino tells Ikuto that the only solution now would be to fetch ice from the source, which is at the tallest mountain in the middle of the island. Ikuto immediately agrees to go up the mountain to fetch some ice, and Yukino volunteers to accompany him. Kagami also begs to tag along, and after much back and forth, Yukino finally agrees to let her come. A few hours later, they finally make it to the mountain, and despite the terrible snowy weather, Ikuto manages to gather a wheelbarrow full of snow. However, the conditions worsen, and Yukino suggests he wait until evening for the storm to subside, but Ikuto refuses, determined to get the ice to Suzu in time for her recovery. Ignoring Yukino's warning, he heads down the mountain but loses his footing and nearly crashes to the base. Just when he thinks he's safe, Yukino and her squad of animals, who had followed behind to search for him, get caught in the snowstorm, and their collision creates a massive snowball that hurtles down the mountain and into the forest. Still determined not to give up, Ikuto grabs a large lump of snow to take back as ice for Suzu. However, when he finally reaches home minutes later, he discovers that Suzu has already recovered, only for him to fall sick instead, and the ice he brought ends up being used on him. Days later, Ayane and her sister Machi have a serious fight at home, with Ayane scolding Machi for being totally worthless around the house. She complains that Machi can't cook, wash, or even clean the house, which is an essential quality of a good housewife, and then goes so far as to say that's why every guy has refused to wife her. Feeling the weight of Ayane's words, Machi decides to train to be a good bride, so she goes to Chikaga's place and begs her to teach her how to cook. Chikaga agrees, but as the cooking lesson starts, Chikaga turns the entire kitchen into a disaster zone in an attempt to cook, so Machi immediately ditches the asylum escapee. Next, she meets Rin, but instead of learning how to cook, Machi's brain short-circuits from the excess vapes and she tells Rin she wants to learn carpentry instead. Rin agrees to teach her carpentry, and after the lesson that evening, Machi shows Ayane a beautifully crafted wooden box she made entirely on her own. But Ayane immediately reminds the nutcase that she was supposed to be learning how to cook, not building furniture. So the following day, Machi returns to Rin to explain that she was mad yesterday and that what she actually intended to learn was cooking. Nevertheless, Rin agrees to give her cooking lessons, but throughout the lesson, Rin acts like a possessed creep. Meanwhile, Ikuto, Suzu, and Ayane sit under a tree discussing Rin and her sudden interest in cooking. However, the conversation that started as a casual discussion escalates into an intense argument between Suzu and Ayane over who should cook for Ikuto. Mid-argument, an arrow suddenly comes flying out of nowhere and nearly gives Ikuto the kiss of death before it plants itself into the tree behind them. They notice there is a letter attached to the arrow, which turns out to be an invitation from Machi, formally requesting Ikuto's presence at her house for dinner that night. Ikuto figures that Machi is using the dinner to show off everything she picked up from her lessons, so he agrees to go, but Suzu and Ayane also insist on tagging along. Later that night, the group arrives at Ayane's residence ready for dinner, but as they are about to climb the stairs leading to the main house, they find Rin in the bushes looking like she was played with by 50 men, who fiercely warns them against eating any abomination Machi offers them in the name of food before fainting. Ikuto immediately suggests they run for their lives, but as they make a break for it, they encounter frightful-looking ghosts resurrected by Machi that scare them into scrambling back into the house. Inside, Machi welcomes them like a horror villain and then enters the kitchen to prepare the food, but warns them never to peek through the kitchen door to see the concoction she is making. A few hours later, after she is done preparing her food from hell, she presents it for them to dive into. But from the mere appearance of the food, Ikuto and the girls can tell just one bite will send them straight to their ancestors. With no choice, Ikuto decides to be the first to take a bite, and after thinking and rethinking his life decisions, he forces himself to eat the disgusting food. However, to his surprise, the taste isn't as bad as he thought, and it's actually edible, so he continues eating. Suzu and Ayana, watching him eat, decide to dive right in, and after a few bites, they realize the food actually tastes great. 2 weeks later, Suzu tries to make a slime cake for her piggy pet, Tona, to celebrate her birthday, but she fails at every attempt. Trying to catch a break, she goes outside to look for Ikuto and finds him staring blankly at a picture, which he immediately hides the moment he hears her coming. His reaction to the picture makes Suzu suspicious, so later, when Ikuto isn't around, she checks the book where he hid the picture and finds out that it's a picture of Ikuto and some mysterious chick. Ayane suddenly pops out from nowhere and suspects the girl in the picture must be Ikuto's babe in Japan, which breaks Ayane's heart. When she and Ayane go to confront Ikuto about the picture, they find him at the beach staring blankly into the water and immediately assume he must be missing his lover. So they leave without saying a word to him, and on the way, they visit Granny to tell her about Tona's birthday and also about Ikuto's mysterious lover in Japan. Ayane also spills that they found Ikuto staring at the water like a dummy and suspects he must be missing his lover's sweet creamy cheeks. However, after listening to the girl's yap, the old granny tells Suzu that Ikuto might just be homesick rather than missing any girl, which makes Suzu rethink the situation. Meanwhile, while they talk, Rin and Yukino earjack the entire conversation, and Rin remembers that, according to what her mom told her, the best time to make a man fall in love is when he is vulnerable. With this in mind, she runs off, determined to make the most of Ikuto's homesickness to her advantage. At the same time, Ayane, Chikaga, and Yukino also have the same idea in mind, so they dress up the best way they know how with the intention of making Ikuto fall in love with them. However, when they all rush to Suzu's house to meet Ikuto, they realize the dude isn't at home. Outside the house, Chikaga finds a letter written by Ikuto saying he is off to the sea. Thinking that Ikuto plans on leaving the island to go meet his lover, Suzu and the rest of the girls immediately rush to the shore to stop him. Upon arriving at the shore, Suzu sees Ikuto in a boat in the middle of the ocean heading for the whirlpool. So using her Indiana Jones skills, she throws a rope at the boat, which latches onto it, and then she yeets both Ikuto and the boat back to the shore. Concerned for his life, Suzu immediately questions Ikuto about why he plans on throwing his life away just to get some girl's T&A. She slaps him repeatedly for being a simp, but Ikuto shows her a bottle with a note inside and explains that the girl in the picture is not his clapping partner but his little sister, Minaki, whom he initially planned to send a letter through the water. Upon hearing this, the girls immediately feel bad for ever thinking the girl in the picture was Ikuto's girl. With Ikuto's help, Suzu is able to make the perfect birthday cake for Tona, and after the birthday celebration later that night, Suzu asks Ikuto if he is homesick and wants to go home. Ikuto admits that he is, but then says he can't just leave her all alone on the island. This makes Suzu happy, so she encourages him to throw his sister's message in a bottle into the ocean, which Ikuto does, and the wave carries it away. Over the following weeks, a mysterious burglar suddenly appears on the island, and lately, crops and other items have been stolen. Everyone immediately suspects Machi because of her creepy behavior, so they decide to confront her. However, Machi denies the allegations and is offended that her own friends, including her sister Ayana, would see her as a useless thief. This leads them to believe that Machi cannot be the thief, but after a thorough search of the entire island, they make no progress. Ikuto then draws up a map of the places the burglar has already visited, and using it, they are able to pinpoint the thief's next target, Yukino's home. Determined to catch the burglar at all costs, they split up to cover every part of Yukino's home that the thief might enter from that night. While heading back, Ikuto and Suzu spot a cucumber farmland that has been completely ravaged by the thief, which hardens their resolve to catch the culprit no matter what. Later that night, everyone convenes at different locations around Yukino's house to catch the burglar. At the store, Rin, Yukino, and Ayane spot a shady figure sneaking in, clearly aiming to steal rice cakes, but when they try to apprehend the thief, he escapes, leaving behind a creepy mask. On the other side of Yukino's house, Ikuto, Suzu, and Machi spot the thief devouring food, and as Ikuto tries to catch the thief bounces around like a ping-pong ball and eventually escapes. Feeling like total losers for failing their mission, Ikuto and Suzu return home later that night, only to discover someone has sneaked inside. Determined to prove he's the man of the house, Ikuto investigates the intruder, and when he checks the bathroom, he is shocked to find a strange girl with no plot covers, causing his rocket gun to detonate and knocking him out cold. A few minutes later, Ikuto and Suzu interrogate the strange girl, who introduces herself as Maymay and explains that she used to work in a circus with her family. However, after she embarrassed herself on stage, her father said he wished he had jizzed on the sheet instead of giving birth to her, and then kicked her out to go find herself a new daddy. As a result, she eventually found herself on the island, where she made friends with a kappa named Tano, and to survive, they had been stealing crops and food from the island's people. The following day, Ikuto and Suzu tell the rest of the gang about Maymay, and together they are able to track down her cucumber-stealing partner named Kappa. Watching Maymay reunite with her friend Tono touches everyone, so they decide to forgive them for all the trouble they had caused. Following this, Maymay and Kappa become residents of the island and start living with Suzu and Ikuto. However, Maymay still finds it difficult to relate to the people of the island because she is shy and behaves like a weirdo. So, to help her overcome her shyness, Ikuto and Suzu decide to personally take her around the island and introduce her to its people. They start by taking her to Rin's place to introduce her, but the visit ends up being awkward as Maymay gets shy and hides inside a drum like a creep. Next, they try introducing her to little Yukino, but Maymay still ends up scaring the girl by hiding inside a giant bear costume. On the way home, they spot Chikaga reading by the river, but when Ikuto tries introducing Chikaga to Maymay, Chikaga notices how shy Maymay is and decides to take advantage of it to torment her by lifting Maymay's skirt and showing everyone her floodgates, which embarrasses her. Sometime later that day, while Suzu, Ikuto, and Maymay are fishing by the pond, Ayane sneaks up on them to play one of her dirty pranks, but she stops when she overhears Maymay bitterly complaining about being a sad, shy loner who will die lonely and without friends. The moment Ayane walks up to meet them, Maymay immediately hides inside a tree, but for the first time, Ayane decides to be nice. After introducing herself as the Shakira of the island, she advises Maymay that the only way to fix her shy personality is to love herself more. The following day, Rin, Chikaga, and Yukino suddenly show up at the house, and as usual, Ikuto and Suzu fear their presence might scare Maymay into hiding inside some obscure object like Ikuto's pants. However, this time, Maymay shocks everyone with her confidence as she says she is fine with them being around and then thanks everyone for being so nice to her since she became a resident of the island. The island is divided into the north, east, south, and west, and each region is protected and governed by a lord. However, in recent days, 2 of the lords have been defeated and dethroned by some unknown creature. One of the dethroned lords is the Lord of the East, but he is not taking the defeat lightly and is out for revenge, so he heads to the western region of the island to find and face the one who defeated him for a rematch. Meanwhile, in the western region of the island, Suzu gets a sudden visit from her cat master, who informs her of the current situation involving some mysterious person defeating both the Lord of the East and the Lord of the North. Ikuto suspects it must be the same mysterious person who defeated and dethroned both masters, but the cat master admits that he has no idea, and that's why he has come to investigate. Later that day, the cat master says he has to leave, explaining that the Lord of the East is already in the west to face the unknown victor who defeated him. He says he has to stop the fight from escalating, and when Ikuto asks if he knows the mysterious victor, the cat master says yes and then gives a perfect description of Tano, Maymay's monster pet. At the same time, Maymay and Tano get a sudden visit from the Lord of the East, who, upon seeing Tano, immediately requests a rematch. As both monsters lace up to beat the heck out of each other, Maymay intervenes, and the second the Lord of the East sets eyes on her, he turns into a foolish simp, declaring that he must take her home to meet his mama. Without wasting a second, he grabs Maymay, and despite Tano's warning for him to put her down, the fat lover boy refuses. His stubbornness leads to a fierce fight, and even when Ikuto, Suzu, and her cat master show up to convince the snuggly bear to let Maymay go, he still refuses and instead runs away with her. However, on his way, he gets sucker punched hard by the Tiger Master of the North, who accuses Maymay of being the one who defeated and dethroned him. It turns out that when Maymay first came to the island, her first stop was the North Forest, and while there, the Master of the North tried to welcome her as a visitor. But her shyness caused her to panic and evade, leading her to accidentally drop a massive boulder on him. When the Master of the East refuses to let Maymay go, the Master of the North effortlessly sends him flying into the deep ocean to commune with the sharks, and then takes Maymay hostage. However, Ikuto refuses to let him take her, explaining that what must have transpired between them was likely a misunderstanding. Still, the tiger refuses to let her go and then challenges Ikuto to a duel if he really wants Maymay back, and Ikuto, too desperate to prove himself, accepts without thinking. The instant the duel starts, the huge gap in skill is clear as Ikuto gets folded quickly by the Tiger Master. However, since he is one stubborn protagonist, Ikuto refuses to give up and continues to attack until he finally dodges one of the Tiger's massive strikes, which leads to Suzu and Maymay getting their clothes ripped and their pom-poms exposed, causing Ikuto a major nosebleed that splashes all over the Tiger's face. With the Tiger unable to see, Ikuto takes advantage to whip him hard on the back, eventually winning the duel and claiming Maymay back as his trophy. Meanwhile, later that night in Chikaga's room, she trips over books, littering her messy room, and as she crashes to the ground, she finds an Illuminati book she has never seen before just casually lying there. As she opens the pages of the book, she shockingly realizes it is a magic book, so using it, she casts a powerful spell over the entire island in the middle of the night. By the following morning, when Suzu and Ikuto wake up, they realize that they've been transformed into animals. While roaming the streets in search of answers to this mystery, they also discover that all the monsters in the city have been transformed into humans, while the humans have been turned into animals, including their friends. Even the village granny is now an ugly monkey, and the only person still human is Chikaga, and that's when they figure the crazy nerd must be responsible for the curse. However, when they try to force her to reverse the spell, Chikaga transforms into a magician, and then escapes into the sky using a broom like a witch. Hours later, Ikuto, Suzu, and Ayane burst into Chikaga's room to investigate the cause of the spell and how to reverse it, but while they are there, Chikaga attacks and magically binds them using a giant box. However, as she tickles and makes fun of them, Panako, Chikaga's elephant butler, suddenly shows up looking like a knockout from Disney and starts scolding Chikaga for acting like a spoiled brat. She hurls a massive boulder at Chikaga as a way of disciplining her, and the impact leaves Chikaga half dead, but also destroys the Illuminati book. As a result, the magic spell cast on the island by Chikaga is destroyed, and everyone returns to normal, including the animals. The next morning, while heading to the farm, Suzu and Ikuto run into an unconscious girl lying face down in the middle of the road with her donkey pet. Wanting to play Good Samaritans, they take her back to the house, and after devouring the food they give her like a starving hyena. The girl introduces herself as Shaneobu, and then explains that the reason they found her lying unconscious on the road was that she had been training and lost track of time until a few months had already passed. When Shaneobu suddenly notices that Ikuto doesn't look like a girl, she immediately figures he must be the famous guy who drifted to the island, and for some reason, she becomes excited. Stretching out her wooden sword toward Ikuto, she firmly requests that she wants to have a duel with him. Ikuto and Suzu are shocked by the sudden request, and when Ikuto demands to know why she is so desperate to duel him, Shaneobu explains that she heard rumors from the 3 region masters that he fights better than Hisoka. Ikuto tries explaining that the rumor is all cap, but Shaneobu refuses to listen to his excuses and insists he must fight her. Still, Ikuto refuses, making it clear that the only fight he has with girls is on the bed, but for the rest of the day, Shaneobu does not let him rest, which makes Suzu jealous. Even while Ikuto is taking a bath, Shaneobu joins him in the bathroom with her jigglies in full display to pester him into fighting her, causing Ikuto to lose gallons of blood. When Ikuto tries to leave the bathroom, Shaneobu grabs him from behind, and they crash to the floor. At that moment, Suzu enters the bathroom, and upon seeing another chick suffocating her crush with her massive implants, Suzu completely loses it and immediately commands Ikuto to accept Shinobu's request for a duel. Scared out of his mind, Ikuto instantly agrees to the duel without arguing, and later that day, he and Shaneobu brace themselves to commence it. As the duel begins, Shaneobu immediately goes on the offensive, but using years of martial arts training from his father, Ikuto is able to parry her attack. Desperate to win at all costs, Shaneobu unleashes her ultimate attack and creates multiple split images of herself, but even with that, Ikuto manages to slash through every one of her false images. However, the decisive moment comes when Shaneobu charges at him at full speed, but she trips, so Ikuto is forced to prevent her from falling by grabbing her floaties. This Johnny Sins move is all it takes for Shaneobu to accept defeat, and when Ikuto, confused, asks why she would do that, she blushes and explains that a strange sensation struck her the moment he grabbed her balloons. After Ikuto is declared the winner, Shaneobu shakes his hand in the spirit of true sportsmanship, and then leaves, fully satisfied to have dueled a true master of the art. Before long, Suzu, Ikuto, and the rest of the gang receive a sudden invitation to an open hot spring. So very early the following day, Ikuto, Suzu, Maymay, and Tono arrive at the location, and are welcomed by the hot caretaker, who introduces herself as Sakuya. However, while she speaks, her head suddenly falls to the ground like a failed prop in a horror movie, but she quickly picks it up and explains that she is a robot. When Ikuto questions when she was built and for what purpose, Sakuya explains that she has no idea, and all her clunky memory can recall is that she fell from an aircraft and landed on the island many years ago. A few minutes later, when the rest of the gang finally arrives, all the girls dive right into the hot spring, leaving Ikuto and Sakuya alone in the living room. While enjoying a snack, Ikuto thanks Sakuya for inviting them to her hot spring and treating them so well, but Sakuya replies that she has no idea what he is talking about. She explains that she didn't invite anyone, which surprises Ikuto, so he shows her the invitation letter. However, Sakuya reveals that she also received a similar letter from Suzu, informing her that she and her friends would like to visit the hot spring to relax. As tension begins to creep in, Sakuya scans the letter with her robotic eyes and discovers that it truly isn't her handwriting. While they discuss this, Chikaga overhears the conversation and decides to butt in. She asks to take a second look at the invitation letter, and when Sakuya gives it to her, Chikaga points out a crimson stamp at the back of the letter and explains that it belongs to an evil criminal known as the Phantom Beniyasha. A long time ago, Beniyasha had terrorized the citizens of the island, and the people lived in fear. But shortly after committing his 7th crime, he vanished without a trace, and as time passed, everyone forgot about him. Upon hearing this, Ikuto suspects that Beniyasha must be responsible for gathering all of them together and might reappear that night to commit his 8th crime at the hot spring. However, Chikaga suggests they don't get ahead of themselves, predicting that the whole thing might just be a prank. With that, Ikuto agrees, and after the rest of the girls are done with the hot spring, he decides to have his own peaceful shower. Suddenly, they hear a scream outside the house, and as they all rush outside to investigate, they find Shaneobu looking like a walking corpse, who shows them an invitation letter, explaining that she was also invited to the steamy bath. As they all return inside the house, Shaneobu eats to regain her strength while Ikuto announces he will take a bath. However, while heading to the hot spring, Ikuto forgets his towel, so he walks into the room first to get it, unaware that Ayana had sneaked into the hot spring, desperate to have his ink on her face. Upon entering the hot spring, she sees the back of a dude she immediately assumes must be Ikuto's, and as she jumps on him, the dude turns, and she sees the face of a monster that scares her senseless. Everyone in the house hears her scream, and while the rest of the girls assume it is just one of Ayana's silly pranks again, Ikuto and Sakuya rush into the bath to find that Ayana is shaken but still alive. Suddenly, Ayana starts itching all over, and at that moment, Beniyasha announces his presence from the roof, taking credit for the terrible situation Ayana is in. When Ikuto asks if he is responsible for sending out the invitations, Beniyasha confirms it and then reveals that he is nothing but a sadistic creep who enjoys hearing the terrified screams of young girls. Beniyasha also mentions that he used a powerful itching lotion on Ayana and then shows Ikuto the antidote, but at that moment, Sakuya gets fed up with seeing his disgusting face and transforms into a war machine ready to blast him to smithereens. However, before she can attack, Beniyasha escapes, forcing both Ikuto and Sakuya to chase after him. Meanwhile, back in the house, the girls, unaware of everything going on, casually discuss Ikuto and how they would each love nothing more than to have the hot Chad in their beds that night. This leads to an intense competition among them over who should get freaky with Ikuto. So, to solve the problem once and for all, Chikaga suggests that before Ikuto gets back, they should all go to their respective rooms, but not before writing a letter asking Ikuto to come to the room of the girl he desires to spend the night with. The rest of the girls agree, and Chikaga assures them that the person Ikuto truly loves will be revealed that night. However, what they don't know is that while they are making the plan, Beniyasha overhears everything from outside the window. So, after the girls return to their rooms, Shaneobu gets attacked first by a massage chair that has been tampered with by Beniyasha, nearly tickling her to death. From outside the house, Ikuto and Sakuya hear her scream, so they immediately rush in to help. Next to be attacked is Maymay, who immediately starts acting strangely around Ikuto as soon as they rush in to help her, and that's when Beniyasha reveals himself as the mastermind, explaining that he used a lotion on her that will affect her behavior all night long. After Beniyasha manages to escape again, Ikuto, fed up with his shenanigans, chases him to the roof of the house to get the antidote from him and reveal his identity at all costs. As Ikuto attacks, Beniyasha drops the antidote, which Ikuto catches, but, due to his fear of heights, he loses his footing and cements himself to the ground. Beniyasha laughs at Ikuto for playing the comic hero, but then admits that he finds him interesting and will definitely write a novel about his heroics. Beniyasha promises they will meet again before faking his disappearance into the night sky. As Ikuto chases after the fake Beniyasha, determined not to let him escape, Chikaga meets up with the real Beniyasha on the roof, and that's when the true identity of the Phantom Mystery is revealed to be her very own mother, Shizumaru, who explains that her reason for committing all those crimes is to get inspiration for her best-selling novels. A week after the horrifying incident, the gang returns, and while strolling through the bushes, Machi accidentally breaks the figurine sealing a shape-shifting rodent known as Genju. When she tries to seal the monster back, the Genju attacks her with giant nuts and then escapes. Desperate to catch the menace at all costs, Machi recruits the help of Suzu and Ikuto, and together they search around the town for the Genju. Ikuto, however, does not believe in superstitions and has no idea why they have to waste time searching for the little animal. So Machi explains that a creature that can transform into anything would be a huge problem for the community. After hours of searching, they run into Yukino and her giant bear pet, but they soon discover that it is the Genju disguised as Yukino. When Machi chases after the Genju, it goes up a tree and attacks her with fruits, which it transforms into eels at the last minute that enter inside her clothes, and the ticklish sensation makes her break dance like Michael Jackson. After spending all day trying to catch the mischievous Genju, which keeps evading them by shapeshifting into people they know, Ikuto, Suzu, and Machi grow frustrated. But just as they plan on giving up, Suzu notices something strange about Ikuto. To confirm her doubts, she tells him that, judging by the way things are going, it is absolutely impossible for them to catch the Genju. In response, Ikuto agrees with her, but that immediately makes her realize it isn't him, since the real Ikuto would go berserk at the mention of the word impossible. So she immediately grabs him by the hand and announces that Ikuto is the Genju they have been searching for in disguise. Eventually, they are able to tie up the Genju, along with Ayana, who has been disturbing them all day. After using the Genju to torment Ayana for a bit, Machi finally uses her powers to seal it back inside the figurine, so it won't disturb anyone again for another 1,000 years. When Suzu asks about the whereabouts of the real Ikuto, they search for him, only to find the no-brain fool dozing and drooling like a drunk father deep inside the forest. Later that night, while heading home, Yukino and her gang of animal friends find a mysterious glowing blue feather from the legendary blue bird, believed to grant good luck to whoever sets eyes on it. So, very early the following day, Yukino and her animals immediately rush to meet Suzu at the stream to tell her about the existence of the blue bird, and as evidence, Yukino shows her the feather and insists they go in search of it. Suzu is reluctant to go because she had planned on harvesting firewood with Ikuto that morning, but Yukino is desperate to catch the blue bird so she can get a good luck charm that will finally bless her with bust and cakes that the anime gods refuse to give her. So she refuses to take no for an answer and instructs her bear to scoop them all the way to the forest. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ikuto waits for Suzu to return from the stream, but after waiting for hours, he decides to go gather firewood alone in the forest with the little pets. Around the same time, deep in the forest, Suzu and Yukino suddenly notice a strange presence, and when they peer into the bushes, they spot a blob-like blue bird, which Yukino immediately assumes must be the legendary one, so she chases after it, despite Suzu's warning for her to slow down. Unfortunately, as they chase the fat bird, they accidentally step on an eroded part of the ground, which gives way and sends them straight into a deep crevice. A few hours later, Ikuto returns home after gathering the firewood, and when he doesn't see Suzu, he figures something must be wrong, so he goes in search of her. As it gets dark, it soon starts to rain, making it difficult for Tano to track Suzu's whereabouts using her scent. Just when hope starts to dwindle, Ikuto refuses to give up, and that's when he suddenly spots the legendary blue bird. From the bird, Ikuto hears Suzu's tiny voice calling out to him, which makes him believe the bird is trying to lead him to where Suzu and the others are trapped, so he follows it. Luckily, his prediction is right, and the blue bird leads him directly to the crevice where the girls are. After that, the blue bird transforms back into the same ordinary blob-shaped bird from earlier. After Ikuto calls for help from the rest of the gang, they work as a team to pull Suzu, Yukino, and the animals out of the deep crevice. After everyone says their goodbyes and leaves, Suzu thanks Ikuto for saving her, but Ikuto is upset that she got injured and tried to hide it from him. He tells her that she should have said something since they are family, and the mention of family makes Suzu tear up. Ikuto immediately assumes he went overboard with his anger, but Suzu explains that she is overjoyed because, all her life, she has always been alone, and now she is beyond happy to experience Dominic Toretto type of family bond. Ikuto then tells her to get on his back, and as she does, he carries her home, doing his best to bury his creamy urges, knowing this isn't the moment to be a cultured freak. Over the following weeks, Suzu is worried that Ikuto has been leaving home frequently, and she has no idea where he is going. Turns out that a few weeks earlier, a school had been set up somewhere deep in the bushes, with Chikaga as the main teacher and Ikuto as the assistant teacher. Every youngin on the island has been attending the school, including all of Suzu's friends, leaving only Suzu behind. The reason is simple. Suzu is one heck of a dummy who hates studying with a passion and would rather eat Daifuku snacks all day. One time, when she was forced to study, her smooth brain couldn't retain any knowledge, so she ran away from school, swearing never to return. However, this time around, everyone is determined to make sure Suzu stays in school, so they cook up with the perfect plan to lead her straight to class, and to execute it, Ikuto is asked to lure her out of the house. So the following day, Ikuto, working according to the plan, asks Suzu to escort him to Rin's place. She agrees, but along the way, she starts to suspect something is off, because every path that should lead them to Rin's house is either blocked or under construction, which is part of the plan. However, Suzu decides to brush off her suspicions, and as she continues to follow Ikuto into a narrow bush path, they step on a trap and fall into a ditch that leads them directly into the classroom. When Chikaga reveals herself, Suzu nervously looks around, and that's when she finally realizes she is in the place she hates most, school, and that all this time, Ikuto has tricked her. She immediately takes off running, determined not to spend another second there, so Ikuto and the rest of the team quickly chase after her. After hours of running through the forest like cat and mouse, Ikuto finally catches her and then tickles her feet as punishment for putting him through a marathon. When he is done, he asks if she is ready to return to class, but Suzu still stubbornly refuses and then lashes out at him for scamming her. After she is done throwing her tantrum, Ikuto tells her how much all of them care about her rusty brain and that all they want is for her to finally be able to put it to use. Those words touch Suzu, so she agrees to return to school with Ikuto, and when they finally arrive a few minutes later, she apologizes to everyone for being hard-headed and then assures them that she is willing to finally learn. Later that day, while picking seaweed at the beach, Suzu stumbles upon the same bottle Ikuto had used to send a message to his sister earlier, and inside the bottle is a letter, so she immediately picks it up and rushes back to the house to give it to Ikuto. When Ikuto opens the bottle, he realizes that it isn't the same letter he sent, but a completely different one written by his sister, Mikoto. As he reads it, he discovers that in her desperate attempt to find him, she somehow got involved in an accident and is now lost at sea. Panicking, Ikuto immediately rushes to the shore to rescue his sister and tries leaving the island using a canoe, but as usual, the whirlpool prevents him from leaving, frustrating him even more. After spotting a bird flying calmly in the sky, Suzu suggests they try flying him past the whirlpool using a kite. However, as they do just that and finally get Ikuto into the sky, Ikuto panics due to his fear of heights, and his screams attract the rest of the gang. Just when he thinks he is finally going to pass the whirlpool, a whirlwind appears and sends him crashing back to the shore. A few minutes later, the gang rushes to check on him, and after Suzu explains the situation with his sister and how he plans to rescue her, Rin suggests they catapult Ikuto past the whirlpool. However, when they try this silly idea, Ikuto gets caught in the whirlwind again and is sent back ashore. Running out of options, Machi then suggests that Ikuto undergo some kind of spirit cleansing at her family shrine, which they all agree. After Machi is done with the so-called cleansing, she promises that she can send Ikuto straight to his missing sister, but on the condition that he marries her. Upon hearing this, everyone immediately objects and calls her desperate hoe. Later that day, Suzu is at the beach, bothered that Ikuto wants to leave her to save his sister, without caring about how she feels. While she spirals emotionally, the old granny suddenly approaches her, and after hearing her concerns and sensing the pain in her heart, she reveals that there is a way for Ikuto to leave the island, but she fears that if she tells him, Suzu and Ikuto will have to part. When Suzu returns home that day, Ikuto, who has also been troubled about leaving her, apologizes for not considering how she felt, and this makes Suzu blush. However, she tells him that she understands and is willing to support him since he has to save his sister. Suzu later brings up what the granny said, and before she can say more about it, the granny suddenly appears and explains that, based on a certain folk song passed down on the island, the only way out is through a massive thunderstorm. However, she warns that a thunderstorm can be a double-edged sword, meaning it can get him off the island, but it can also cook him alive. To prevent the latter, she advises that Ikuto and Suzu both visit the Sea Dragon God Island to pray and ask for his blessing. After arriving at the peak of a mountain, the granny shows Ikuto and Suzu the legendary island where the Sea Dragon God lives, but then informs them that they will need a special key to open the shrine door. To help them get the key, she gives them a detailed map of the island and explains that the key can only be found at the top of the mountain at the center of the island, called Mount Fuji. However, before they embark on the journey, she warns them that the task won't be an easy one, as they will surely face dangerous trials along the way. Ikuto and Suzu immediately start the journey to the mountain at the center of the island, but along the way, they encounter their first obstacle, the Lord of the North. When they explain that they are on their way to Mount Fuji to retrieve the key to the Sea Dragon God Shrine, the overgrown cat refuses to let them pass, explaining that no matter their reason, it is the duty of the four masters to protect the Sea Dragon God. Without hesitation, the cat attacks, but Ikuto and Suzu manage to evade his strike. As the cat charges for a second attack, Maymay and Tono suddenly arrive to help, and with their combined strength, they eventually take down the Lord of the North. As Ikuto and Suzu continue their journey, they encounter their second obstacle, the Lord of the East. After gorging on a bucket of food, the obese panda attacks Ikuto with his sharp claws, but Shaneobu arrives just in time to fight in Ikuto's place, and seeing how well Shaneobu handles the situation, Ikuto and Suzu decide to leave the fight to her. As they head deeper into the island, they face the third master, the Lord of the South. Since Suzu knows her master too well, she decides to fight this one herself, but when the fight gets tricky, Ikuto steps in to help, and together, they manage to win. With that, Ikuto and Suzu eventually make their way to the top of the snowy mountain, where they find the key, but it gets snatched from them by a chicken who turns out to be the Lord of the West. Tossing a wooden sword to Ikuto, the chicken lord declares that he won't let them have the key without a fight. With no choice, Ikuto engages the chicken in a fierce swordplay, and by pulling together every bit of strength he has, he manages to take the chicken down and finally get the key back. Moments later, Ikuto and Suzu finally make it to the shrine, and, using the key, they make their way inside. At the same time, Ayane also trails them into the shrine, and before Ikuto and Suzu can even say their prayers, she dives straight into the river where the Sea Dragon God lives, determined to make a counter-wish that will prevent Ikuto from leaving the island. However, while making her wish, Ayane suddenly creates a disturbance that causes the Sea Dragon to react violently to her presence, and in an attempt to escape, she makes another costly mistake by accidentally holding onto the Sea Dragon's whisker and cutting it. This causes the Sea Dragon's anger to boil to the max, and in retaliation, an earthquake occurs that forces Ikuto, Suzu, and Ayane out of the shrine. When Suzu questions why Ayane is there, Ayane confesses to her evil deed and then shows them the cut whisker, admitting that she is to be blamed for everything. Even without saying a prayer to the Sea Dragon, Ikuto still decides to leave the island that night during a terrifying thunderstorm, and even though Suzu tries to stop him, he still gets swallowed by the massive whirlpool. Determined not to let her crush die, Suzu returns to the Sea Dragon Shrine alone to ask for his forgiveness and also pray for Ikuto's survival. However, she is shocked when she sees her friends, who also came to support her and pray for Ikuto's survival. Ayane also takes advantage of the opportunity to mend the Sea Dragon's whiskers she ripped, and once all this is done, they all return to the island, hoping for the best. Days later, after the team visited the Sea Dragon Shrine, Ikuto wakes up to find himself on the other side of the whirlpool. As he wonders where the heck he is, he spots a bunch of gym bros rowing a boat toward him, and inside the boat, he shockingly finds his sister Mikoto, who is beyond delighted to see him again. Ikoto is relieved to see that his sister is alive, but when she asks that they go home together, he refuses, insisting he has to go back to the island. Ikuto explains that he has a special person waiting for him, and after saying his goodbyes to his sister, he makes his way back toward the island despite the turbulent waves. When he comes across the mighty whirlpool, he tries to Mission Impossible his way past it, but he still gets swallowed by the whirlpool. The next morning, Suzu and her granny are at the beach talking about Ikuto with a worried expression on their faces, when, lo and behold, Suzu finds Ikuto by the shore unconscious. She tries to wake him up, and when Ikuto finally regains consciousness, she hugs him, excited to have her man back. Comment Island Babes if you watch this recap to the end. If you enjoy anime recaps like this, subscribe to the channel and watch this next video.